At issue this week, Canada's housing crisis. The country's on track to be short 3.5 million units by the end of the decade. After months of pressure to act, the Prime Minister announced measures to help Canadians with the cost of living, including cutting the GST on new rental builds.
We realize it's the right time to step up with removing the federal GST on purpose-built apartment buildings.
The opposition says the government has not acted soon enough.
A year and a half of paperwork and not a single house built since it was announced in the spring of 2022.
Is the government doing enough to solve the housing crisis? I'm Rosemary Barton. To break it down this week, Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Good to see you all. Chantal, let's start with you. You know, many of these things that were announced today had been previously discussed, or things that, you know, Jagmeet Singh or others had called for. What do you make of the timing of this?
Well, politically interesting. At the time when the polls are really turning south for the Liberals, with the House about to come back. But the sound I most heard today as the Prime Minister was announcing the measures he was announcing was the sound of a rug being or trying to be pulled from under the feet of Pierre Poilievre. I can't tell you, I'm not a housing expert, whether these measures will in the long run make a difference, but I can tell you that they take pages from Pierre Poilievre's biggest battle horse so far. And I'm guessing that the hope is over the next year and a half, 2 years to the election, to neutralize the housing issue rather than continue to have it be a sword issue for the Conservatives as it has been.
It's housing that works for Pierre Poilievre, Andrew, but it's also affordability, and the government also tried to deal with some of that today with the calling in the grocery chains to yell at them and put down prices and all that kind of thing. What did you make of the timing?
A lot of politics involved, not just the polling politics or the opposition politics, but the internal Liberal Party politics. So if you've got caucus baying at you to do something about this problem, then doing something is what you do, regardless of what that something is. This is not going to address the full scale of the housing problem. The CMHC says we need to build something in the order of 3.5 to 4 million new housing units in addition to the ones we would have already have built, which amounts to about tripling the current rate of construction. Fiddling around with GST rebates is not going to get you that kind of anywhere close to that level of new housing supply. And if we really want to get a grip on housing prices, we also have to look at things, the ways in which we're now artificially stimulating the demand for housing. Either way, to actually talk about lowering the price of housing means you're tangling with the interests of people, the majority of people who already own homes. So what you're going to see is what you've seen is a lot of flapping of wings on all sides about this issue, but not really effective policies, and I include the opposition in that. Whether Trudeau can neutralize the issue, however, I think depends upon where housing prices actually go. And if we're still talking about a housing crisis and housing prices being so high a year or two from now, I don't think it'll matter what policies he brings out or what policies the opposition will be. The sitting government wears that.
Althea?
I would say not just neutralize it, but actually hope that it can turn into a win for the Liberal government, because they came in 2015 saying, hey, the Harper government has done like nothing during an entire time in office, and we're going to take housing seriously. But at the time, they were really focused on affordable housing, and now it's not just affordable housing they need to deal with. To Chantal's point about the sound, to me, the sound was relief from the caucus benches, because all of the things that he announced today, whether it's, you know, delaying the CEBA loans for a year, the GST off purpose-built rental housing, the groceries, you know, all of this are actually things that MPs in my conversations with them over the past 2-3 weeks have talked about. These are solutions that have been kicked around. These are things that they've heard at the door. These are things that they themselves as a group have talked about. So it was like, finally, the Prime Minister is listening. And it wasn't just that, it was the way it was framed. Like, finally, the Prime Minister came out and he said, we have a plan. This is who we're fighting for. It's the middle class and everyone who's working hard to join it, in case you'd forgotten it. And then he said all these nice things about caucus, but it was really, to me, more a caucus management issue, as well as like, hey, Pierre Poilievre, you can say whatever you want on the sidelines, but we are still a government and we still have the actual ability to do things.
And we'll talk more about caucus and whether he's managed to calm them in the next block. But Chantal, you want to say something?
Yes, on the grocery stuff, I actually see in it the signal that this is a government that really, really wants to keep the NDP on side and for this parliament to last. Who was going after grocery prices for the past 6-7 months? It was Jagmeet Singh, to the point where I came late to watching the news conference the Prime Minister gave, and he was in the middle of an envolée on grocery prices, and if it had not been for the accent, I might have thought I was listening to an NDP news conference. The difference between the NDP, which can only say, haul them in and do something, and the government is the government has levers, or, well, being called into the office of the principal is not the same thing as going to see the guidance teacher.
But it's preposterous, though. I mean, for the federal government, the leader of the federal government, which oversees an explicit price-fixing ring in the production of major food items like chicken and eggs and butter, to be going after the grocery store executives on the issue of high food prices is just the height of hypocrisy.
Okay, we can't turn this into a supply management debate.
Well, we're talking about the policy versus the politics.
Yes, no, I hear you. But even more to the point, though, Andrew, when I did an interview with the Prime Minister in December, I asked him about this very thing, and he said, "Oh no, I would never call in the grocery guys because then they'll tax everyone more, and they'll end up passing that down to consumers." Like, this was not even on the radar back in December, and now suddenly it's a great idea to bring them to Ottawa. Go ahead.
It's amazing what being at 26% in the polls how it will change your perspective. And yes, keeping the NDP on board and keeping that section of the voting constituency, at least giving the Liberals a chance, is obviously part of the agenda.
What does this do, Althea? None of us are housing experts, but what should Canadians take away from whether this is going to improve the situation? Like, do we have any sense on whether this is going to make things easier for people, or is this really just all about the politics?
On the housing front, on the GST, yeah, I think it will make a difference. Already you're seeing some people say, well, maybe we won't build a condo building, maybe we will build a rental apartments instead. It is a solution. It's not the end-all and be-all, but it's part of a solution that experts have long suggested the government should do. And in fact, the government said itself it should do this a few years ago. On the grocery, the heads of the grocery chains, I mean, I think it's interesting what you said, because he actually threatened to tax them more, which would result in exactly the same thing that you outlined. I think what's important is that the Prime Minister signaled that this is not just one announcement as like this is supposed to be the answer to the problems. This is the beginning of several announcements on housing. And the Housing Minister has told the public that in the Federal Economic Update there will be a housing plan. So there will be more. What does that look like? I don't know. But I think it is interesting that there is actual common ground between what Pierre Poilievre is talking about and what the federal government is talking about in terms of densification, NIMBYism, ending exclusionary zoning municipally. I think that the Conservative plan lacks nuance, and I think that is something that is going to come out more and more, because you can't just threaten to withhold cash from municipalities who actually need it to get some of that housing built. If you have inadequate sewage infrastructure and you need federal cash in order to be able to build more to add to that, now you would be in a catch-22 where you have access to no cash.
Chantal quickly, and then Andrew quickly.
Well, still there was some of that Pierre Poilievre spirit and some of the smaller letters in the announcement today, i.e., if you're not going to change or remove some zoning restrictions, municipalities, or build next to transit stops, we will not give you access to our fund for housing. It's not the same, but it is mostly taken from the same kind of page.
Andrew, last word.
This is not going to triple the rate of housing construction. It's fantasy land. This is them announcing something so that they have something to announce on both sides of the aisle. Neither of these things is going to make the difference. There's going to have to be a whole lot more policy, and we'll see what comes in the fall. But this is not going to do it.
Okay,
but it's a good thing.
Okay, we're going to take a break. More at issue coming up.
But what we're focused on right now is how we're going to deliver for Canadians.
So we talked about it a bit. How bad is that grumbling inside Liberal caucus? Could it affect the PM's future? That's next.
But we know.
MPs have given Trudeau an earful behind closed doors, sharing concerns about the party's dismal showing in the polls and demanding a more forceful response to Pierre Poilievre. Sources have described the conversations as blunt and frank, but the Prime Minister today said this about caucus.
We are, as a team, united and focused on solving the big challenges that Canadians are facing.
Did Trudeau do enough to reassure that team things can turn around and he is the leader to do it? Welcome back to At Issue, here to break all that down. The challenges facing the caucus, Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Althea, let's start with you here. I know that there's a lot of grumbling going in. They were all standing behind him looking okay at the end of things. Should he be concerned about his job? Should he be concerned about that complaining that he's hearing?
I think he got the jolt that he needed, that the people around him frankly needed. I think a lot of the people who spoke to me, and I know some people spoke to the CBC as well, it wasn't necessarily out of anger. Like, there are a few people who really want to get rid of the Prime Minister, but most of them just want to see the Liberals awaken. Yeah. And I think what you saw today was the Prime Minister saying, the patient is alive. I am here after all. There is life here. Don't write us off yet. And that, to me, I think was the number one issue that caucus needed to hear. And I think that they did hear that. The other issue is they needed to feel listened to and valued. And 3 times in his speech, he talked about the good work caucus was doing. And they needed to hear that because he doesn't maintain his relationship with caucus. Yeah. He's a people person for like the rest of us, the public watching this, but he is not. He's like an introvert internally, and my colleague Susan Delacour talks about this often. Yeah. But they're not feeling the love, and they needed to feel the love.
Andrew.
I thought he got off pretty lightly, frankly, considering where they're at in the polls, but they don't really have anybody else. They know that they owe their jobs to him. Usually when caucus is really feeling feisty and really threatening the leader, they'll say things like, he's getting very bad advice, it's time he replaced his principal advisors. We didn't even hear much of that.
Oh no, we do hear lots of that.
Some behind the scenes.
Katie Telford is like number one.
But behind the scenes, you weren't seeing anybody going on the record saying it. Yeah. So, I think it's a measure of how weak the caucus is in this party, how much it's leader dominated, that even when they are 15 points behind in the polls, they just really don't have much of an alternative.
Or is it because, Chantal, he can walk into the room and listen and convince people that everything's going to be okay? I mean, I don't know.
Well, there is some of that. He did get them elected, and that cuts you a bit of slack with caucus. But if there was a successor, a Paul Martin type, that polled a lot better than the current Prime Minister, I think those MPs would feel less of a we still like Justin Trudeau mood, and they might be inclined. This is the party that showed Jean Chrétien the door, or tried to show Jean Chrétien the door. Why? Because they believed they had Paul Martin. He would do better, and he would treat those who felt left out better. There is no one like that, standing in the shadows of Justin Trudeau. I also believe that many of the MPs, the message they mostly received, I think, today, was the message that the government still has time. And you saw the Prime Minister said we're not having an election until 2025. Yeah. Well, I think if you do not see an improvement in the polls within 4 to 6 months, the discontent will resurface, and probably resurface in a way that will be difficult to push back on.
But at that point, Althea, you're sort of running out of time, right? If you're like, I don't know, in 6 months, you're not going to get rid of someone and start again, are you? I don't there's a time management game that everyone is playing here too.
It depends how bad it gets, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
I would say it's not everybody who feels like they're a member of Parliament because of Justin Trudeau. In fact, many of them feel that they are a member of Parliament in spite of Justin Trudeau. Some of whom were elected in 2021 and 2019, and it wasn't that 2015 wave that brought them to Ottawa. And you see that especially with MPs from rural areas who feel like the Liberal agenda hasn't necessarily matched up with what their constituents are telling them. And in fact, before caucus, I was thinking, with Mr. Poilievre going where he is, there might be some Liberal MPs that might be ready to cross the floor and pluck them. I didn't put this to them. I'm just saying where Mr. Poilievre was going and the concerns, like how intense and acute the criticism against the Prime Minister was. But actually, I think this week, Mr. Poilievre sounds back like Skippy and less prime ministerial and more like that little aggressive attack dog.
Yeah.
And the Prime Minister seems to have found his footing. So let's see what happens on Monday.
I mean, we went from a week where it was a lot of people grumbling quietly, or privately anyway, to reporters, not in front of cameras, to Andrew's point, to him standing there with the caucus behind him. Yeah. That's not nothing. I know it's all acting, Chantal, but I mean that's not.
No,
it's
seriously,
not nothing.
What did you expect?
Seriously, you're a member of caucus and you need help to get re-elected from the party, and you're told to stand behind the leader, and you're going to say, "No, I'm not." Or I'm just going to go like this behind his head to show.
And the leader who signs your nomination forms?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm naive.
Seriously.
I'm naive. So is it? It's put to bed then for now. Is that how I should take that, Chantal? Then Andrew.
I think 4 to 6 months. If the next budget looks like it's mashed potatoes. A lot of MPs are going to be thinking about whether they want to run for re-election. There is no process for a caucus the Liberal caucus to show the exit to Justin Trudeau. But by the way, Brian Mulroney resigned in a 5th year of a term, as did Pierre Trudeau.
Yeah, you don't need a process if caucus is angry enough, Andrew.
And there's a real question about whether, in fact, their interests would be served by getting rid of him. If you're going to go down to defeat, there's an argument for saying better to go down under the old guy than under the new person, because then he wears it rather than the new person. If Brian Mulroney had led the Conservatives in 1993, they still would have lost, and badly, but not as badly as they did under Kim Campbell. The other thing is anytime you have a leadership race, you risk opening up new divisions within the party that the leader had previously been able to cover over. And you have to ask the question whether the new leader could do well in the sections of the country where they absolutely have to do well, namely Quebec.
Please stay with us. We have to take a short break. We'll be back with more at issue and take a look at what a shakeup inside the Prime Minister's office could do for the Liberal caucus and their troubles. That's next. Okay, welcome back. As we said, some tension inside the Liberal caucus might be gone now, but it does beg the question whether changes are needed and whether those changes beyond the leader himself could happen inside the Prime Minister's office. Let's bring everybody back for a final round. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Andrew, I'll start with you. Obviously, I haven't heard specific ideas around this, but I guess my question is, if you change the people around a prime minister, can that be enough to re-energize the party, the leader, to sort of fix some of the problems that caucus seems to believe that exist?
Not if the new people basically take the same approach as the old people, which would be the most likely phenomenon. I mean, maybe you have a problem of burnout or whatever with people who have been with the Prime Minister for so many years. But the fundamental thing of everything has to be centralized through the Prime Minister's office, which bedevils every Prime Minister. Seems to be the more they do it, the longer they stay, the more problem it becomes. That's a big part of this government's problems. It's kind of a blinkered approach to things. It's unwillingness to change approaches. And when you read even the off-the-record comments from these anonymous Liberals, most of it is about, well, we need to change communications. We should be spending government money to promote the party, or we should be attacking Pierre Poilievre more, and not substantive policy shifts in direction, which I think is really what's required.
What about you, Chantal? How much of those sort of structural changes in an office can make a difference, or is it ultimately just about the leader?
For sure, the cabinet shuffle earlier this summer shook the confidence of many MPs in the thinking in the PMO and the kind of advice that Justin Trudeau was getting. And for sure, from the outside, the impression is that we've reached the stage, not for the first time in a government, where the PMO becomes more of an echo chamber than a place where someone speaks truth to power. But it is getting really late in the game for Justin Trudeau to change his palace guard and his chief of staff. He has been with the same chief of staff throughout. And I suspect that it's part of his comfort zone. Whether that's good for him or not, I tend to think a change would have been beneficial. Possibly it's a bit too late.
I think Katie Telford is now the longest serving chief of staff of a prime minister. So just to show people that it is a job that is very demanding and people don't always last that long. Althea.
Although they would criticize you the other way around, right? Like Stephen Harper couldn't hang on to chief of staff,
that's
so
right.
he kept rotating.
Yeah,
so
that's right. We're never happy. We're never happy.
I think it would be to the Prime Minister's office's benefit to have people who don't necessarily think exactly like Katie Telford and Ben Chin and all the senior advisors around him. I think that would be a good thing. It is good to have vigorous debate and have new ideas come in, and they're at a time where they need new ideas. But it's not just the Prime Minister's office. There is a sense from caucus that there's no direction at the party either, and that they're not, like, they've allowed Pierre Poilievre to define himself over the summer. They knew he was a leader and they did nothing for a year. And, you know, are they election ready? They were supposed to be the big red machine, and there doesn't seem to be movement at the party. So it's like, it's a two-track of complaint from them. But I think, you know, new blood is not a bad thing, and giving people the ability to take decisions and make decisions is also a good thing, because that's another complaint that you hear, that things take forever because there's only one person who can sign off.
Chantal.
If the Liberals manage to pull another term, I think they will have to thank this summer's wave of polls, because the result of those polls has been, as it should be, to suddenly focus minds on a hanging in the morning. They may not pull through, but there is an upside to getting these polls now and not 2 weeks in an election campaign.
That's a really good point, Andrew.
When this Prime Minister came in, he promised the return, among other things, of cabinet government. One of the overwhelming impressions of the government these days is that it's overwhelmed, that it can't get stuff done, it takes forever to make decisions, it just seems adrift. Well, when you're trying to run absolutely everything through the Prime Minister's office, basically through 3 or 4 people, that's the kind of thing you get.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you all. Appreciate it very much.